if you look at it from a policy standpoint, you can surely make the case that this election may come down to abortion versus immigration, each side's best issue. And this abortion thing is not going away, and Democrats have had a lot of success running on it for the last couple years. It was huge in 2022. I don't know if it'll be as huge in 2024. What do you think?
I think this week was a big encapsulation of why this issue is going to be such a big deal and why it's going to be really hard for Trump. Because he started the week on Monday with Trump putting out a video statement where he, for the, kind of spoke about his position on abortion going forward, kind of in some detail for the first time. Because he had flirted with supporting a national ban of 15 or 16 weeks. He had openly talked about doing that. But in this video, he didn't mention that. What he mentioned was, I'm glad that the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, which of course he took credit for because he deserves credit or blame, depending on how you view it, because he appointed 3 of the justices in the majority that made that decision. But what he talked about was, I want it to be up to the states, which is where it is now. Let the states decide, let the states work their will, and that is going to be what we live with. That he came out with a position. The next day, the Arizona Supreme Court announces their decision that an 1864 law, before Arizona was a state, this is during the Civil War, this is way before women had the right to vote, that outlawed basically all abortion, with the only exception being to save the life of the mother, was going to go into effect in 14 days. And so immediately Trump's position of, well, leave it up to the states, and then Arizona's Supreme Court says this is going to be what Arizona is going to have to live with. That's going to be the decision of this state, at least for now. It showed you why that's such a tough position for Trump. And so finally, later in the week, he was pressed, would you sign a national abortion ban, which is something he didn't talk about in his video. And for the first time, he said no. That now, this is Trump, so we know his positions are fluid, but that's the first time he has ever taken a firm stance that he would not sign a national abortion ban. Now, in a way, that's kind of a moot point because I don't think you're ever going to have 60 votes in the Senate to pass a national abortion ban anyway, setting it at 15 or 16 weeks. But it is interesting that he took that position. And I think that's smart politically for him. And I think we all know Trump's positions on a lot of these issues are fungible, right? And so he realizes, because he's got a pretty good political radar, that this is a loser for him. And that the best thing he can do politically is where he is now at the end of this week, which is to come out and say, look, I want the states to decide. My personal opinion is Arizona went too far with their Supreme Court. They'll work that out, but I do not support any kind of federal legislation. I think that's probably the best he's going to be able to do. And in terms of the political impact, the other thing the Arizona Supreme Court said was that a ballot initiative, and we talked about this a little bit last week, can go forward for November on abortion. And in every state so far, since Roe was overturned, where a ballot initiative has come up dealing with abortion, the pro-choice side has won every time. That includes some conservative states as well as liberal states. And so in Florida, they're scheduled to have, they're projected to have a ballot initiative this year. Florida's probably not going to be close enough at the presidential level for it to matter, but Arizona is going to be very close. And so if you have a big turnout of people who are mad as hell because there's an 1864 abortion law that is now in effect in Arizona, and they have a chance to come out and vote for a constitutional amendment that would be pro-choice, which I assume will pass with a pretty big margin, that is really good news for Joe Biden.
Right, and this is one to me where I just feel like the extremes of this are so obvious and so wrong to so many people. And I understand, people have their own religious thoughts. But when we're talking about no exceptions for rape, incest, life of the mother, I'm here in Missouri. You see what's going on in Texas. I mean, when you talk about extremes, that's about as extreme as you can get. Now, I understand the other side, even though I don't agree with it. in terms of, well, this is a potentially a human being, and all life is important, even if the life starts at trauma, which would be something like I'm discussing, like rape or whatever it is. But I actually believe that the majority of the country, and the majority of the country didn't want Roe overturned, by the way. I think it's important to note that. But some type of compromise, I'm looking right now. I remember when this story happened, a lot of people were bringing up the abortion laws in France. And I'm reading here, abortion in France is legal upon request until 14 weeks after conception, 16 weeks after the pregnant woman's last menstrual period. Whatever the number of weeks that potentially you could compromise on, like I think what's going on in Florida, you saw that as a thing with DeSantis, like 6 to me seems like it's not enough. A lot of women don't even know in some cases that they're pregnant. So whatever the weeks, if there could ever be a compromise on this, to me what France has, 14, 16 weeks, that seems like a pretty fair compromise that a lot of people in the United States would agree on. Of course, there's going to be some people who never agree, but I'm talking about a huge swath of the middle, I think, would accept something like that.
Yeah, well, I think Republicans have tried post Roe to position themselves that way. I mean, when you listen to Lindsey Graham, who's proposed a 15-week ban, he makes the exact argument you make. He says, look, France, and I think he said 47 out of 50 European countries have a ban, have abortion legal up to somewhere between 12 and 16, 14 and 16 weeks, in that range, right? But, and so Trump thought, I think, well, this will be my position too. The problem with that position is that it would only apply to states like California and Illinois. It wouldn't apply to Mississippi and Alabama, right? It would allow the states who have 6-week bans, or in the case of now, what's going to be the law in the land of Arizona, which is almost a complete ban, they would be able to keep their bans, but blue states would now have to be at 15 weeks, right? So it's not a true compromise. You're right. A true compromise would be saying, okay, we'll pass a national abortion mandate, but it will apply to every state equally. So California and Alabama and Georgia and Utah and Nevada will all have the same. Because if you want to compare what they do in Europe to the United States, that would be the apples to apples comparison. Because in France, it's not 14 weeks in Paris and then 6 weeks in rural areas. It is a complete national standard. So that would be the real compromise. I don't think we'll ever get there as a country. I don't think either side would ever allow that to happen. But if you were saying what would be the compromise, that would be it. A national abortion policy where you had, say, 15 weeks all across the country. I don't think that will ever happen. In fact, I don't ever think any kind of national abortion legislation will ever happen, because unless the filibuster is done away with in the Senate, which, who knows if that happens in the future. But as long as there's a filibuster in the Senate and you need 60 votes, you're never passing any kind of controversial abortion legislation one way or the other. So what's going to happen is the pro-life side won this. They won what they thought was a major battle in overturning Roe versus Wade, and it was. But A, it's been a political loser for them, and I think it's going to continue to be. And B, we're going to end up in a place where abortion is going to still be mostly legal across the country. And what I mean by that is, yes, we're going through a period now where you have all these, strange decisions like the Arizona Supreme Court. But eventually what's going to happen is, in blue states and even purple states like Arizona, and even red states like Florida, ballot initiatives are going to pass where they're able to do ballot initiatives, and it's going to enshrine abortion rights in the Constitution for those states. And so what you're going to end up with in a few years is abortion will be roughly legal in most of the country, and the total number of abortions probably won't drop, because people will be able to get access either in the state they live in or in a neighboring state to abortion. In fact, data that has come out so far has shown, at least in the first year of Roe being overturned, the total number of abortions in the US didn't drop. What changed is where those abortions were happening. So that's why the Roe versus Wade decision, as big of a deal as it was, and I don't want to downplay it, it was a huge deal and a huge win for the conservative side. But at the end of the day, it's a political loser. It will continue to be. and I don't think it will end up in fewer abortions. So I don't think you will have made any practical gain in what your objective was.
Right. And I think you just I think you just described that perfectly. Where's the win? If you're really trying to, because of your belief system, your morals, your religion, whatever, if your goal is to actually reduce the number of abortions and you're not doing that and you're losing everywhere else politically because of that, you hate to say where's the win and loss in this situation, because again, it's about a life, but where's the win there? The true win for the GOP, it's not there. And I'll make, this might be a terrible analogy, but again, I'm sitting in here in Missouri. I'm not trying to compare the two issues. Very different, very different. But I always laugh when Missouri doesn't have legal sports gambling. So what do people do? First of all, either get on their offshore app, but what a lot of people do in St. Louis, I live in St. Louis, you know this, used to live here, Eric, right across the river is Illinois. What people literally do is they drive their car into a parking lot over the bridge to legally post their bets in Illinois. So again, might be a terrible analogy, but like, you're not stopping people from gambling. You're stopping people from legally gambling in your state. They're just going with an offshore book now from Aruba, or they're going across the river, the Mississippi to Illinois, and you're losing all that tax revenue. So the same with Missouri with abortions. Are you really preventing abortions? Like you said, probably not. All they're doing now is driving to a different state. So again,
Right.
where is the real win?
Right. And again, we'll see what the numbers come out. You may, on the margins, decrease the total number of abortions for a couple of years until this all gets sorted out and it's legal in most states, which again, I think is where we will end up once these ballot initiatives are able to pass in a lot of these states. And so at the end of the day, what have you done practically? You've inconvenienced a lot of women who are going to have to go do this, and in some cases you may have forced some women to have children they didn't want to have because they didn't have the means or the capability to cross state lines. So you've accomplished maybe a slight reduction in the total number of abortions, and the price you've paid for that politically is election loss after election loss, and maybe losing the presidency. It's one of the big reasons they didn't take the Senate in 2022 and barely won the House in 2022 is because of this issue. And I look, in some ways, I respect it, because if you are on that pro life side and you believe that all abortion is murder and you believe life starts at conception, and you say, you know what, that is what I believe, and I am willing to pay the political price for that because I think it's the right thing. I don't necessarily agree with that position, but I respect that position. But you should at least acknowledge that that is what you're doing. Your purity of trying to force this issue when clearly the American public writ large is not with you, is resulting in election losses and, at the end of the day, very little, if any, decrease in abortion, which was your ultimate goal.